There's 4 times of the year where there's a Rosh Hashanah. Be'echad b'Nisan, Rish Chodesh Nisan is one Rosh Hashanah, which is, and that Rish Chodesh is L'mlachim, L'regalim, Cholu. It's a Rosh Hashanah of how they calculate the years of kings begins from the Rish Chodesh Nisan, and the same thing Yom Tovim begins, because since Nisan is the first month, Rishnu Lachem L'chad Hashanah, so therefore Nisan is also the beginning, and the Rish Chodesh Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah for Yom Tovim. Messiah, and the Mishnah concludes, going through the cycle of the year, so it starts from Nisan and goes all the way around the Messiah, and it concludes Be'echad b'Shvat, on the first day of Shvat, Rish Chodesh Shvat, Rosh Hashanah Le'ilon. It's a Rosh Hashanah for the trees. Kidivri Beis Shammai, like this is the opinion of Beis Shammai. Beis Hillel Bepsil say Chamish also by in the 15th of Nisan is the Rosh Hashanah of the trees. V'hinei kivin shekol harba nechlalim ba'osis suk v'nikroim b'ois Hashem, since all these 4 Rosh Hashanahs are included in the same concept, they're the same type, they're all Rosh Hashanahs, they're not just days of the year that have significance, and also they have the same name, they're called Rosh Hashanah. And to note, shekol inyan shenikra b'shem rosh, everything that's called the head. K'moy Rosh Hashanah, like for example, whether it's the Rosh Hashanah, but v'chein Rosh Chodesh, or the head of the month. And similar to that, whenever we have the concept of a head, Shem Hamushal, this is a borrowed name from the idea that we have a head by us. Similar to the head that's in the body of a person. According to this, it's explained look at the Torah of the Alter Rebbe. At length in Ateres Rosh, which deals with the Mamorim of Rosh Hashanah and Bechlal Tishrei. So in the Mittler Rebbe explains over there, as well as the Alter Rebbe, it's not just the beginning of the year or the beginning of the month, meaning it's the head. What's the concept of the head? Similar to the head of a person. Initially, in the head of a person is included all the limbs and organs of the body. Initially began in the head. And even after every limb and organ comes to its particular place in the body, they are still run through and by the head. In a similar vein concerning Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh, initially all the details, whether it's the days of Rosh Chodesh or the days of the year, are all found initially in the head. Even after all of the details, each one stands in its place. They are run by their klal, that it's called the level of the head. So that's why. So the term Rosh Hashanah, Rosh Chodesh, has great significance. And now that you have the 4 times of the year, or the 4 dates in the year that are called Rosh Hashanah, so it must, since especially the word Rosh has such significance, so it must have a commonality. From this itself, it's obvious. Shaykh has been called Arbas Rosh Hashanah, that there's an association between all the 4 heads of the year. How much more so when we talk about the Rosh Hashanah at the beginning of the Mishnah. The first thing in the Mishnah talks about Rosh Hashanah L'mlachim L'regalim, top of page Vav. It talks about the Rosh Hashanah of kings and the Rosh Hashanah of Yom Tovim. Surely it has a connection. Rosh Hashanah Shebesayf HaMishnah, it has to do with the Rosh Hashanah at the end of the Mishnah, Rosh Hashanah L'ilon, the Rosh Hashanah for the trees. Sheiches Miuchedes Gam Mitzada Inyan, the Not Soifim mit Chalasim Besoifim. There is a unique connection because of the concept that we know that the beginning is staked out in the beginning is staked out in the end. So in addition to the fact that they all have a connection, that they're all called Rosh Hashanah, and they're all from the same type of date, and they all have the significance of being a Rosh, specifically the beginning and the end of the Mishnah have their own unique connection because of Notz, Cholas, and B'Seifa. And therefore the Rebbe concludes, V'lachor seemingly, what's the connection between the head of the year for kings and for Yom Tovim to the head of the year for trees? We can explain this according to what's explained at length in the Dvar Malchus that Tzemach Tzedek in Parshas Mishpatim Malapasik Shol Shregolim Tachil B'Shana 3 Yom Tovim you should celebrate for me throughout the year, meaning the pilgrimage festivals Pesach, Shavuos, and Sukkot. Shemevi Divrei B'Chai V'Aponim Yafes, that the Tzemach Tzedek brings the words of the B'Chai and the Ponim Yafes. Shematzino, that we find Shemei Hamoyed Metzl B'nei Yisrael Kshurim Im Inyan Atvur, that the days of Yom Tovim by the Yidden are connected with the crop, with the grain, etc. Pesach, for example, Pesach, Shuzman Ktsir Asoidim, it's the time when we harvest barley, and that's why the Omer that's brought on the second day of Pesach is brought from Sa'odim, from barley, to allow for the consuming of the new barley wheat, the new barley grain. Chag HaShavuos is Man Ktsir Chitim, and the Yom Tov HaShavuos, the time of the harvest of wheat. Valderech Chag HaSukkos, in a similar vein, Sukkos, even though it's not a harvest, but it still has to do with the produce, with the grain, etc. It's the Yom Tov, when you gather, it's the Yom Tov of gathering, it's called, that's one of the names of Sukkos, because when you're gathering from your silos, from your threshing floors, from your vineyards, etc., then it's not just like Pesach and Shavuos has to do with grain, which is the barley and the wheat, but it also has to do with your wine and with your olives, your grapes and your olives. In addition to your grain, that's during the Yom Tov of Pesach and Shavuos. So the Rebbe goes on to explain line 17. And the idea behind this, as it's understood from what's explained over there by the Tzemach Tzedek, the Geshem Sha'idei just like through sowing and planting in the ground. Through the seed rotting away underground, becomes the growth of the grain or a tree that gives forth fruit, in a way of increase, many times as much more than how much was planted, much greater than the seed. Concerning when we're talking about grain, the addition is primarily quantitatively, because you take one kernel of wheat or one kernel of grain and you plant it, and what's the result? Primarily, the result is many more kernels. True, there's the stalks that hold it, but it's primarily an increase quantitatively, much more than the one that you planted. Concerning planting a tree, it's a uniqueness also in quality, as it will be explained further on, because over there you have a seed of a fruit that has no flavor, can't be eaten, etc. And from that grows a whole physical tree with branches and leaves and edible fruit and so on. So it's not just an increase in growth in quantity, but also in quality. Like the Chazal say, does then a person not plant a measurement of one kur for the sake of bringing in a crop of many measurements, so much more? In other words, it's the small is to bring about the big. came to Benegel B'nai Yisrael, so too it's concerning the Jewish people. And that we're saying that this planting of the Jewish people is for an increase so much greater. It's also Bechlal, in general, the Jewish people as a whole, and also V'chol Echad Befrat, top of V'cholach Zachs Yisrael Befrat, Echad Vachs Yisrael Befrat, top of page Zayin, every single man and woman of the Jewish people, specifically, that they are planted in this world, and planted in Gola, sometimes it's explained, to be able to have an increase that's exponentially, both quantitatively and qualitatively. We know the Jewish people are called the first of his produce, the first of his crop. Concerning the Jewish people, it says, Uzrati hali ba'orez, and I planted her for me in the earth. So this idea of the association of the Jewish people with the earth, the Rebbe is going to connect with our famous Hayoim Yoim, to note Gam Mashkos also from what it's written. Ki atem tiuli eretz chayfetz, and Hashem says, you will be for me a land of a desirous land, a land that I desired. Okay, do Torah Baal Shem Tov. Like it's known, the teaching of the Baal Shem Tov, maybe that my father-in-law, in other words, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the leader of our generation, the one whose yahrzeit is Yud Shvat, brings down in many places. Shekol Echad Misrael, that every single Yid, who K'may Eretz Chayfetz, he's like a desirous land. He's like a good land, a productive land. Shabbat Tamun Kol Hoyn Yakar, that in that ground, in that land, is concealed and hidden all precious wealth. Avonim Toivis, Margolias, precious stones, Vachilukim B'mdei Yisrael, Hem Rak B'negel La'avoida Hanadreshes Kadesha Inyan Zay Yaviv Begili Vifal Polase. And the differences between the Jewish people is only concerning the work that's necessary to bring it out in a revealed way, and that it should function, that Jewish person should do what he has to do as that precious stone. So what is this idea of getting back to the idea that we are called planted in the earth? So the Rebbe says in line 10, it's the idea of the descent of the neshama down here below, from a high building to a deep pit and dungeon. So that is the idea that the Pasuk says that I've planted the Yidden in the ground. In the Yeridazu, but this descent, that it descends so low, is for the sake of an ascent, through the bittul and acceptance of the yoke to Hashem, which is Reishis Havoida V'ikra V'sharsha. The Kabbalah's oil is the beginning of our Avodah, and it's the core and primary part of Avodah, and the root of our Avodah, Kimavor Betanya, like explained in Tanya. Shehu Bedugmas Rikavin Ha'inyan HaNizra. The idea of bittul is like the rotting away of whatever is being planted, because bittul is about taking away myself, taking away my ego. That's the same thing when the seed rots away in the ground, it remains without self, without identity. And then, only after the Kabbalah soil, only after the seed rotting away in the ground, so then becomes the growth in a huge amount. Both quantitatively and qualitatively, just like in the metaphor of a physical seed, that when it rots away in the ground, only then can it give off growth to such a great degree. Line 18, when the actual growth takes place, so then what comes about is an idea of joy. Like it says, those that plant with tears, with joy they shall harvest. That he's going on and crying. What's the idea of crying? Shu inyan harikoven. That's the idea of the rotting away. That's the true idea of bittul v'kabbalah soil. That's through the bittul and the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. So he's has that bittul. That's the crying. Noise mesh chazara. He's carrying the he's carrying what what he carries the seed in. He will surely come with song, carrying his bundles, meaning his bundles of wheat that he has, the result of his harvest that he planted with tears, he will now have with joy. This is the reason why the Yom Tovim are Yom Tovim for joy. Now we started explaining Yom Tovim have to do with the growth of the crops. So because when you have the actual growth of the crops, then you have the joy. So we can add to this this idea that the Yom Tovim are called Regalim. It's also from the word regel, meaning in Yiddish a foot. Like it's emphasized also in what's called aliyah l'regel, going up to the base of Mikdash by foot for the 3 Yom Tovim. Who is obligated to go up to Yerushalayim in the base of Mikdash in those Yom Tovim? Whoever can go up by foot to the Harabayis, if his feet are capable of carrying him, both because of age or health reasons, so then he is the one that's mechuyev in oil regel. If a person by foot cannot make it there, so then he's not obligated to do so. So we see the connection between the feet, the physical feet, and these Yom Tovim. Like it's brought down, like it's explained in the Gemara Mechagiga and also in the words of the codifiers. What does that mean spiritually? The idea of a foot indicates the idea of bittul and kabbalah soil, just like we were talking about the planting of the seeds, which precede the celebration of these Yom Tovim. So the foot also indicates on bittul and kabbalah soil because the foot follows through the instructions of the head without question. Top of page Ches, Shaydeze Nasim Nasimcha Moedem Simcha through the bittul and kabbalah soil. That's how we attain the level of joy. Just like we said before, that through the bittul of the Rekavan Agarin of the seed rotting away, so then afterwards we result in the Boyav Everina Nois Alamoitzov is carrying the bundles of wheat, the bundles of grain with joy. Now, this idea of joy is the idea of joy is not just higher than the foot. So through the foot you reach something higher than the foot, but even you reach something higher than the head. Where do we see that joy is the idea that's higher than the head? That's the reason why joy breaks through barriers. Because then he finds himself in such an approach that's beyond his normal way of doing things based on reason. Because reason is limited, joy breaks through boundaries. The fact that he's joyous, he goes beyond his normal way, how he does things based on intellect. So we see that joy is beyond the level of intellect. And just like all of the above that we said, that through the bittul and kabbalah soil we reach to much higher, the level of simcha and so on. At least similar to it, it's also to be found in the sphere of Malchus. From the way it is, that from the fact that this exists by sphere of Malchus, from this it's understood also concerning a king in a simple sense, that there's the bittul that brings about the highest levels. Melech Yisrael, a king of the Jewish people, a Jewish king. That by a Jewish king, that's where the idea of the Rosh Hashanah of kings applies. The Chazal say that the fact on Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the head of the year for kings, that has to do specifically with a Jewish king. Non-Jewish kings have different dates. But the idea behind this is, what's the connection between kings and what we've just been talking about? The idea of a king is being nullified to the King of Kings, Hashem, in a total way. Shalachein, this idea that the king expresses a complete bittul to Hashem, Hamelech shekara shuv eina zoykif. A king, when he's standing Shemoneh Esrei and he bows down, he doesn't do like us. He bows his head and then he raises it up again till the next time he has to put his head down. But by the king, because his bittul is the greatest form of bittul, so therefore once he bows his head, he doesn't pick it up again till the end of Shemoneh Esrei. So here we see how the Jewish king is about bittul. And not only that, but the primary idea of a king is not just that he is batel, but he draws down bittul to Hashem in all the people of his domain, his country, and so on. Kol echad ve'echad Yisrael, every single yid. Kedrash is Chazal apasik, like Chazal darshan apasik, soim tosim alecha melech. You shall surely place upon you a king. So the Chazal say, Shetehei eimosoi elecha, that his fear should be upon you. Now, in the simple sense, that means you should fear the king. But according to Chassidus, Commission is Boyer, by a Torah of a Magid, like it's explained in our Torah of the Mizritcher Magid, that this is that the idea of a king is to teach us and to show us how to have bittul to Hashem. The bittul of the king is similar to the bittul of Sfiras Malchus. Shu inyan ara is batlas. It says that the ground, which Malchus is called Oretz, it's the lowest of the 10 spheres, is the level of bittul. Which like it says in the Kabbalah Sefer called the part of the Zohar called Sifrat Neusa, like it's explained at length in Kabbalah, even in the world of Toyu, that everything was in the way of a king and a keser, and they couldn't work together because of each one was the full force of that sfira. Hine besfiras hamalchos hareza behepech then the Sfiras Malchus, it's the opposite of all the other Sfiras. Over there and all the other Sfiras, it says Vayimloich Vayamas, quoting the very famous pasuk at the end of Parshas Vayishlach, where it goes through the Sari Esav, that Chassidus and Kabbalah says that this is similar and reflective of what took place in the world of Tayu, that each sphere was in the way of a king, and because it was in the way of a king, full power. So when another one came, so Vayamas, it died, it broke. Nemar, Benusach Acher, because of Benusach Acher, the way it says it in the pasuk, in a different terminology. In other words, the Rebbe didn't use the word Vayamas, all he says Vayimloich Nasa Hepchametzias. So he says, but pasuk says it in more graphic terms. Mashenkin b'Sfiras HaMalchus, as opposed to Sfiras HaMalchus, Inyan Aris Batlas, the idea of the bittul of the lowest Sfira, Balachas Kamav Kamashu Ba'il K'Maishu Ba'il Matikun. And how much more so the way it's in the world of Tikkun, Shesham Ba'im Kala in Yanim Atikun V'Shlem Musam, that over there all the matters come set up and in a perfect state. So by Malchus, though, if I remember correctly, in this, when it goes through all the different things, Vayimlach, Vayamas, Vayimlach, Vayamas, when it comes to the last one, it doesn't say Vayamas, because Malchus had the bittul even in the world of Tayu, so therefore there was no Shvira. And if in the world of Tayu it had bittul, how much more so in the world of Tikkun? Line 6, only through the bittul becomes all the most elevated and highest things that's in Sfiras HaMalchus, Ube'inyan HaMelech, and all the elevated things that's an idea of a king. Just like the idea of growth. comes about through the bittul and the rotting away of the seed that's planted in the ground. The same thing, the full force and power and wonder and beauty of the king is all a result and an outgrowth of his bittul, like the fruits in the tree is an outgrowth of the Koven Hagarin, the rotting away of the seed.